Alors, nous sommes le sous-comité de...
Order, please. This is the Subcommittee of International Human Rights, the Standing Committee of Foreign Affairs and International Development. We are now Thursday, November the 20th, and this is meeting number 44. We're going to be televised.
With our witness, we'll deal with an item of business, and that is a motion that Professor Kotler put forward. Yes, Mr. Sweet.
Just particularly because of some concerns I have, we usually go into camera for business. Can we do that?
We can do that if you wish.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So first of all, is everybody agreeable? Okay, we'll go in camera. à l'ordre. Chers collègues, nous...
Order. Colleagues, we are already in session. We are back into public mode, and we have with us today as our primary and sole witness. Are you getting any sound, sir? Are you good? So, good day to our witness, Jacques Rangira. And as you know, we are continuing our study. We've decided to change our process for asking questions after the presentation made by the witness. And in order to optimize the time we have with him. So we'll give the floor to the witness now. Good day. My name is Jacques Rangira, and first of all, I'd like to thank the Subcommittee on International Human Rights for the opportunity to participate and to appear before you and to perhaps contribute. I represent PAGE Rwanda, which is the Association of Family and Friends of Victims of the Genocide. We were formed in we were created in 1993, but received our charter in '94. We are looking for, of course, means to respect and recognize the memory of those lost to us, and to try to ensure that we can learn more about it. We try to honor the dead every chance we get. And we want to ensure that we can transmit to future generations this duty to remember, the duty to remember. But we also wish to share it with the public at large in order that they may be sensitized to this brutal horror. This offers some comfort for these survivors. They have the opportunity to testify to their experience without being felt judged. We also offer them support, psychosocial support, and we have to survive, of course. We are also cooperating with research institutes and centers on the issue of genocide, and we have made quite a bit of collaborative efforts with others who have suffered genocides in the past, such as the Jewish community, the Armenians, Cambodians, and others for whom nothing is being done in particular at this time. So we are very sincerely pleased to be here and have the opportunity to deal with the issue with you and discuss. And if you'll allow, Mr. Chair and members, perhaps we could have a moment of silence for the victims at this time.
Je vous remercie. Ainsi, honorables députés, membres du comité, mesdames et messieurs.
Honorable Chairman, members of the committee, guests, we cannot continue without underlining the contribution and the efforts made by Canada in this struggle against genocide. Last April, for example, the Assembly, your House, accepted a motion put forward by the NDP that Canada make every effort to oppose any other genocide ever in future. We thank you for that positive vote. In 2004, of course, Canada established the 7th of April as a day of commemoration for this genocide in Rwanda. All Canadians and all peoples, in fact, to take that time to reflect on the 7th of April to this genocide and what we may learn from it. In 2008, again, another resolution so that the 7th of April become a day of reflection on the horrors of this Rwandan genocide. And we thank you for that. We thank you for that because many countries do nothing on this issue. We can't pass in silence either, once again, that which has been done in Canada in coordinating Leon Gesera, for example, condemning him for what he had perpetrated. And we believe that Canada acted very honorably in that regard. Once again this afternoon we find ourselves here with concrete proof that Canada is in fact interested and doing something towards countering this situation. So once again I would like to thank the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee of FAID, who understood the consequences and ramifications of the genocide on its victims, on its survivors, and the deep impact on the psychosocial impact of children born of these facts, of these events. We thank you sincerely for the opportunity to participate, and I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to dialogue with you. The consequences are many, multiple, and they are very serious. They are very deep. We can't discuss the consequences without discussing the actual acts, the events themselves. We know that sexual assault and violence was used in a conflict situation. We know that when this occurs, it's used and perpetrated in a classical sense. It's a rape. It's sexual exploitation, and it results in any of a number of other ways: forced sterilization, forced abortions, and in Rwanda, this was a very extreme situation. It goes well above any notion of sexual intercourse. The act is conducted in order to dehumanize. It's perpetrated in order to humiliate and to sever the relationship between men and women, rather than being directly killed, much as some of their peers were done. They're left to the mercy of these militias to be used and abused, suffer sequential and continuous rape. It would sometimes go on for weeks. These rapes were not undertaken in some back alley or some room somewhere out of sight. This was done publicly. This was a public humiliation. The purpose is to exacerbate the situation for the victim. It's a form of torture, and all sorts of sexual acts were conducted on these victims. The objective of sexual violence is to dominate. It's to intimidate, to pressure. It's to occupy territory. It's to consolidate power. And once again, in Rwanda, it was extreme. It was terrible. Those who led these militias, the well-known Minister of Rape, as we called her, Pauline, who would observe what was going on. And the order came from on high. Before you kill any Tutsi woman, she must be raped. Worse again, worse again, in thanking her troops for their actions, they wanted to completely destroy and the Tutsi woman. Now, we've heard a lot of this stuff in the media. It had to be done. I have read some of the testimonies that were made. It ended up at the end of the day with a massacre. And they would gather together some of the community and they'd say, you must rape these women. And if they decided not to, or if they couldn't, or if they wouldn't, they put them all, locked them up in a room, and they threw in a grenade. What I'd like to perhaps put forward here for those women who were victims of rape during this genocide is to indicate and to clarify that this was the result of a very carefully detailed, thought-out, premeditated planning process. Since the 60s, approximately, we were showing the terrible nature of the Tutsi woman by contending that in order to get up from her seat, they would surround her by Hutus, and they would strike her with swords when she got up. If you know Rwandan history whatsoever, you would know that they would not end up at the royal court, but you had to express your hate or your contempt in some way or another. And Tutsi women are qualified as all sorts of horrors. Since the 80s and the 90s, for those who may have read some of the testimonies or have seen perhaps their manifest in a document that was published in Kangura, you had the Ten Commandments of the Hutu. And the first three reflect this propaganda, this everyone must know that the Tutsi woman, whether she's at work, she always is a representative of her Tutsi ethnicity. Whomsoever shall marry a Tutsi or takes one on as a concubine or a protege or a mentee, so we show that the demonstration to the entire Hutu population that this should be the object of our contempt and hatred. The second article, all Hutu must know that our daughters are much more dignified and satisfied in their role as women, role as wives and mothers of children. And they can be just as good for secretaries, assistants, and aides. So in the first article of this so-called Ten Commandments, they demonize the Tutsi, and they beatify almost the Hutu woman. In the second article of these 10 rules, the Hutu woman is glorified. She's put on a pedestal. A terrible, terrible phenomenon, of course, to cause this animosity, extreme animosity between Hutu and Tutsi. And in the second article, Butukazi, be vigilant, remain vigilant. Make sure that your sisters understand reason. So a very targeted and focused effort and campaign to ensure that there's been a rewrite of history. That we know in fact that there were mixed marriages. And here what we're trying to do is purify, an ethnic cleansing, purify the race, and get rid of all Tutsis from the Hutu race. So when we talk about the consequences, the sequela, they run extremely deep. These women have been destroyed to their very soul. And it is extremely sad. I would have liked to come here this afternoon preparing something to perhaps, for those who have seen perhaps the various films in Anesthésie, which we filmed on the issue, one of these survivors is going to be married there in Montreal. But Athanasi, the subject of the film, lived with one of her children. The child is extremely ill. Recently registered as a university student, and suddenly he went deaf overnight. Now, is this psychosomatic? We believe so. He just cannot afford to hear anymore. He does not want to know. And yet, we're in a relatively well-developed country. We know what a hearing aid is, but when he accompanied his mother to Rwanda, I had an opportunity to speak with them. Why don't you come together? I would have liked to see them both and discuss the issues with you. And he said, well, no, even with a hearing aid, I don't hear anything. It doesn't work. I don't know if it broke down, but all I can hear is this terrible noise in my head. It hurts me, and I feel my ears might explode. All to say that in the consequences, of those suffered by the victims or the survivors are horrible, horrendous.
You know, we are talking about a current topic, what with all this sexual harassment. We know, we've seen people who finally are able to speak up after 20 years of suffering. But when you have been raped, and when you know the rape of not one person, but many people in public, you have to wonder if there's anything to speak up about. It's almost as though you wonder if you have anything worthy to say. And when you are dehumanized like that in public, you wonder, maybe that is your fate. And you're contented with it because it hurts you so much. You are so overwhelmed by what's happened to you. I'll talk now of Godlieve Mukarasasi of the Soweto organization. Setsova is a Rwandan organization.
Development of widows and orphans to promote self-sufficiency and livelihoods. Après l'assassinat de...
After the assassination of Eddie, of my 7 brothers and sisters, this is Annunciata was saying it, one of his proteges, because she heads the organization. She says, like thousands of Rwandan women, she has decided to raise a child that she calls the fruit of hate. A child who is the result of hate. So an entire generation of children, and we have approximate statistics about this, about 20,000 such children who were born of those rapes. These children of hate, these children of shame, some of them had the good fortune not to be born with the HIV virus, and for the majority of those victimized mothers, you have to remember that they got militiamen who were sick with HIV out of the hospital to go and intentionally infect those women that were victimized. That just goes beyond simple rape. I don't know how I could describe it to you. So for these women, they have this terrible memory. It not only affects their body, but their mind, their memory. And Gottlieb used to say this about these women who were victimized. So what do they do, these women? What does he do with these women? He teaches them to manage their mental health, and by doing so, afford a bit more room for their children in their lives. Because for those women, their experience has led them to completely deny those children. But they had such little support, they resigned themselves to accept those children once again. But those women were so terrified that they never told their children what had happened to them, but they nevertheless became dysfunctional. We don't have that much time, and we still have 3 MPs who would like to ask you questions. If you could just finish your testimony, we'd really appreciate it. All right, then. I am still going to quote a witness testimony from a 19-year-old named David. When we asked him about who his father is, he chooses to lie about it, like many of those children. David did not know his father, and his mother was more fair-skinned, but he is darker-skinned, and he would like to know his father. His mother told him about what he was born out of, but David will never know his father, and he will always carry with him the fruit of that hate. So what happens in all of this? I talked about what happened then because the effects today are obvious. The effects are psychological, terribly psychological. It pushes people all the way to getting psychiatric therapy. It also has social effects because those children born of those rapes are constantly judged, and their mothers always have to prove what happened to them. They have the burden of proof, whereas they are the victims. So how can we help all these people? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wagingara.
Have a procedure of going government opposition. We've discussed it based on the fact that we're down to 1 question from each party, and that both Mr. Benskin and Professor Kotler have SO31s. We'll start with Mr. Benskin. Can we just divide the time between now and 2, between yourself and Professor Kotler, in order to ensure you can both get to the House?
Sure.
I apologize for the short.
Just wave or something.
Okay. All right.
So when I'm ready. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Rwiwangira, for being with us today, for testifying. The last thing you said really speaks to the goal of this study. We are trying to target the effects, and we also hope to learn something from the experience of those children who, as you call them, are fruits of hate.
There's a well-known saying, well, actually comes from Spain, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And what we are endeavoring to do is learn from the horrible experience of Rwanda. These types of actions are continuing. We see them in the DRC. We see them happening in Syria. And as a country that has built its reputation on providing aid, on providing resource and help in crisis situations, I hope that we can learn from your experience in helping that segment of your community that was forgotten, which are those 20,000 children born of hate. You have touched on what the consequences or their experience has been, the denial of their parents, the denial of themselves. And I would like to put the burden on you right now to share your counsel on what can be done in the early stages to help bridge that gap, to help change that tide and continuation of that hate. My feeling is if the community succumbs to that hatred of those children, then what was intended succeeds. That community ceases to exist. So what counsel can you give us in terms of what we can do in the future and possibly to help continue helping those Rwandans to understand and support these children who were born of these atrocious acts?
Merci, honorable.
Thank you, honorable member. There's a lot to be done. Obviously, it's difficult right off the bat. As I was describing earlier, a lot of the mothers of those children did not give testimony exactly of what happened. That's why the statistics are so incomplete. But once we know, what can we do? Well, first off, we have to create a zone of understanding in which these women can feel understood, the way Ms. Godelive Mukarasi does with her organization. In order to find out who these women are, that is problem number one. Obviously, it's been 20 years, and some people might argue that it's too late now, but I don't think it's ever too late. There are organizations that exist that have access to very few resources in Rwanda who undertake this kind of work. And from there, we could extrapolate and say, what else can we do? Are there victims of those acts here in Canada? As I said, we try to offer that kind of comfortable haven for victims. We are based in Montreal, but there are other organizations that work alongside with us here in Ottawa. There's Mura, for example. What happens is that victims are not too keen to testify. And even when they testify about what happened to them, they don't offer enough details. When you survive that kind of thing, you want to turn the page as quickly as possible and look to the future and take hold of life. So what we have to do, first off, is to create the kind of haven where women can feel comfortable talking about what happened to them and determine who those children are. And once that's determined, I think they have the classical problems of children who have come out of that kind of situation, social insertion, psychological issues, but we can offer them the kinds of help we give to other people who have those kinds of problems. Once we have established that kind of haven framework where these women can comfortably talk, we will be better equipped to detect those children's needs. I talked about 2 particular cases in my testimony, but there are thousands of them. Okay, another question now from Mr. Kotler, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have to tell you, first off, that I have a long history with the Rwandan question and your organization. As you said, in 2004, I was the Justice Minister when we proposed the first commemoration of the Rwandan genocide, and the Attorney General for the Mugesera case, which is one of the most important precedents in the world history of condemning and judging and condemning genocide. And in 2008, as you also said, I proposed a sort of reflection on the prevention of genocide. Now, I know that you have your 9th conference coming up on the prevention of genocide this December. And I'm getting to my question. When you said there weren't only consequences to the genocide, there were acts to genocide.
And one of the most important of the acts was really the incitement to hate and genocide, and amongst which was the incitement to rape as an instrument of the genocide and not just as the consequence of that genocide. And my question, therefore, is how is the process of reconciliation proceeding in Rwanda today, and even amongst the Rwandan diaspora, given that state-sanctioned incitement to hate and genocide and the dehumanization of the victim as prologue or preparation for the genocide, including amongst it the rape of Tutsi women?
Il est clair que
it is clear that reconciliation has been hard. The genocide was the apogee of a whole process started in the 1970s. There were test massacres of Tutsis. We can talk about 51, 61, 63, 70, 73. In the 90s, 1992, the first test massacres, test pogroms took place. It was the Wawabe who were killed, 9,000 of them. So the Rwandan genocide is the fruit of a whole culture. People were manipulated and were taught to lose the Sotutsi. Sotutsi, who once we greeted him and welcomed him in his country, wanted to dominate. But it's all false. It's all lies. That's what's terrible about this. My mother was a teacher in the 1960s in Rwanda. And she had just come out of school. And at the time, we had just gotten modern education. So everything that was written was true. So she was giving classes to children where she taught them that the Tutsis came from Abyssinia. They're not Rwandan. that when Jogera would get up with those swords piercing into Hutu children, that's all she knew. And because it was written down, to her it was gospel. I don't know if you understand. And she's Tutsi, and she was teaching children in the 1960s in Rwanda. So it was the government's will to teach these things, where even as they were lies. And you see that history in Mugusera's testimony, where he was saying that we have to send the Tutsis back through the Mwango River, and to send them back to where they came from, essentially. That's what he was getting at. So how can you work on reconciliation in these conditions? I believe that there needs to be a tremendous effort in the country with the current government. They have to call on the wise elders who were there in the 1960s, who are now over 70 years old, who can now come and testify before the Rwandan youth about what the real truth is about who Hutus and Tutsis are. Hutus and Tutsis are not two different ethnicities. They're like social classes more than anything else. At the time, a well-off Hutu could move on to the Tutsi class because, for example, he had more cows. And a very poor Tutsi could move up to the Hutu class because he'd become a servant. And we have to tell our youth about all this. Hate was used as a tool within political propaganda. And once we have established that as the real truth, we can finally move forward. It's very difficult, but we have to get on it because we need to reconcile. Otherwise, we can see another such degradation of society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rawangira, for your time and your presentation. Well, I was in Rwanda a few years ago, and so I really appreciate being able to follow up with an expert on some of the issues that are very important. Well, do you think that Tutsis are generally, I don't know how to put it well, could you tell us that do Tutsis generally feel safe and integrated into the Rwandan society today, or is there still racial tension there? And has President Kagame put any checks and balances in place to prevent genocide from happening again in the future?
Des efforts constants sont faits.
Those kinds of efforts are undertaken in Rwanda. Following the genocide, given the exaggerated number of killers, the Gacaca Tribunal was set up. It was an exercise, it was a very interesting exercise, because the judgment was done on the Hill. The killers were accusing other killers. They knew the victims because they were their neighbors. They could name them. They could name you who was killed. It was a very difficult exercise to undertake because for the victims, something like that might have seemed very arrogant, because when the killers were exposing themselves, they were repeating how they had murdered people. But at a certain level, it gave them the opportunity to tell themselves, your Uncle Philip was killed and we buried him in a hole over there. And the victim's family could finally go find Uncle Philip's bones and properly bury him. So it gave them closure. Even if they had suffered and were a victim of a genocide, they got some closure. Just finding someone's bones and properly bury them gives you an opportunity for closure. These kinds of actions are very important in a security perspective, because as long as you have not gotten closure, you can't move along. I have a friend in Montreal who lost 7 members of his family. And we never found out where one of his brothers was killed. And every time he goes to Rwanda, he is haunted by the idea that one day at nightfall, he might well see his little brother again. And I'm telling this to you to insist on the fact that if we want security in Rwanda, you have to settle these myriad tiny issues. Well, do Tutsis feel secure in Rwanda, was your question. Well, yes and no. Yes, because the government has deployed considerable effort to ensure security of all Rwandans. We often say it in countries around Rwanda, there is no country who can claim to have as good a security as Rwanda, as a country. I was there in 2011, and I met Canadian friends there, not Canadians of Rwandan origin, but Canadians, Quebecers. And it was nighttime, and they were walking freely in a popular quarter. I was the one who was surprised. And when I approached them, I realized that I knew them. And I asked them, "Are you crazy? At this hour, it was 11 p.m., you're alone? Aren't you afraid?" And they tell me, "No, we're actually going to the bar." And we did find ourselves at the bar with them. I was on vacation with my cousins. And I asked them, "What are you doing? This is incredible." One of the friends I met there is he's a soldier. He told me we're cousins, we're out. But I can tell you something. If something happened to those 2 people over there, my vacation would end and my job would start. So this is the kind of effort we're doing for the security, to ensure security for all Rwandans. Do the Tutsis have their place in all this? Generally, I would say yes. But considering all the hate that had been, there is always a Damocles sword hanging over them. It's an issue of education. As I was saying to Mr. Kotler earlier, the work is not done yet. Certain Tutsis don't feel secure, even though necessary measures are being deployed. It's not the intrinsic security that they get.
Thank you, Ms. Graywall. Thank you as well to the other colleagues who were so cooperative in allowing us to change our normal pattern of behavior. Et merci à vous, Monsieur Wirengara.
And thank you, Mr. Wirangira. Thank you to all. Séance